Welcome to the Rebuild Procurement Podcast, the #1 procurement podcast in the world, where we dive deep into topics to keep procurement people up to date and ahead of their peers. Subscribe on YouTube, wherever you're at. Go do it now. Helps us, helps you see what's happening here. On today's episode, we have two main topics we're going to dive into. Supply chain related. One, avocados, Chipotle. You choose your pick, but that's where we're diving there. And then number two, F35s. You like jets, you got to listen in. Let's get into it. I'm Tom Finn, bringing 15 years on the client side, procurement, finance, and category management experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Veek, a procurement geek on the sell side of our street, and I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals doing managed services at a company that we call Summit.
So we have two things we're going to connect on here, Alan. You're bringing one on avocados. I'm going to go into the story of a jet and tariffs. I think both we were kind of just looking for things that were interesting over the weekend. I think both these kind of popped up.
Topical, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to hop into avocados, which I used to dislike. Or actually, I used to be completely indifferent on. If they landed on something, fine. If they didn't, also fine. But in the world of like getting healthier, you start reading stuff, and then you take some things away, you add other things. So avocado became my cheese.
Yes, yeah, that's I love that. Became your cheese. It's your superfood cheese. Yeah, when my wife and I were first married, we lived out in California, and we lived with a couple who were kind of foodies. And the woman, Doralice, lovely woman, she's kind of like my adopted mom. I lived with Bill and Doralice for about 6 months, and then Michelle lived with them before we got married for about 6 months as well. And the Doralice taught us how to make proper guacamole. So that's where we learned everything we know good about guacamole. So, and we still use that recipe today. We used it last night. Happy Cinco de, I guess, 6 de Mayo, but Cinco yesterday. And so that we were introduced to avocado the right way through guacamole in
it's
probably
not just
1991.
Avocados and cilantro, avocado, cilantro, and garlic powder. Is that not what it is?
It's not just that. I mean, it could be that. That's the simple. You could do anything you want to, but very importantly, it has to have lime juice, and it should have a little chili powder. If you've got some chili powder, throw some chili powder in there. Some would say red onions. Some would say also maybe finely minced tomato.
Yeah, tomato undervalued in salads when properly done.
Yes,
tomato in like vinegar, avocado, very good.
Yeah. Very, very good.
Clearly coming to this podcast hungry. So
hungry, yeah. We gotta watch that. Yeah. So that was my first exposure to avocados. As a matter of fact, we rented a house in California one Christmas. Invited all my family and Michelle's family in, and so we had 20 people staying in this Verbo, and it abutted an avocado field. It was pretty wild. Like they're just this orchard full of trees and lots of avocados. There may have been 1 or 10 packed into everybody's luggage when we left. Yeah, because there was no fence.
1 ton of guacamole made.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was that. We had a lot of experience with avocados then. This article from the Wall Street Journal that covers off on the avocados is very interesting. I'll share my screen, and we can have a look here. So here's the article. Came out yesterday, just in time for Cinco de Mayo. And the headlines, the key points of the article is that Chipotle basically currently relies, or at least in the last couple of years has relied almost solely on Mexico for its source of avocados, which is true for most of America. 90% of the avocados we consume in the U.S. come from Mexico. You can see this chart here. This is since 2010 up until present day. Mexico is the lion's share. We get next largest amount from Peru, some from Colombia, some from Dominican Republic, some from Chile. I'm sure some from California, which might fall in an other bucket down at the very bottom. But this article basically highlights that Chipotle has some big supply chain risks there, especially with the recent tariff announcement on Mexico. So they've been working with new partners, new growers, new farmers in Colombia, Peru, and Dominican Republic, Brazil, and Guatemala. So think about all of those areas around the equator, much like we talked about last week with Mike when we were talking about coffee and where coffee beans grow. Avocados kind of have that same turf, so to speak. And the article then kind of waves a hand and says, despite this diversification that Chipotle has been working on for the last 7 years, Mexico still remains a significant supplier, and the company is really expecting to take a hit when it comes to prices for the avocados that they're going to be importing. So, what I thought was interesting about this article was, to me, it really represented a day in the life of a good category manager. So this is kind of table stakes for category management. You need to look across all the things that you buy and figure out where are our biggest risks, and then you need to look for some diversification. So I believe, I didn't find it anywhere in the article, but I believe that Chipotle was finding themselves with 100% of their supply coming from Mexico. Now, probably they had a diversification within Mexico, so they had multiple growers bringing them avocados, since their needs are so large. But it's the sort of thing that it's all coming largely from one region inside Mexico. So picture any sort of catastrophe, any sort of environmental risk that might, some sort of tornado, hurricane, weather event, fire that rips through the area. They would find themselves basically, as we say in the trade, avocado would be 86 on the restaurant menu. You know this lingo, Tom?
No, I don't know the lingo.
You clearly were never a server.
I was, but it was at a retirement home, though.
Oh, yeah. Other things become 86 at a retirement home. You never run out of anything, I don't think.
Exactly. I think I know what you mean. Maybe different then.
Yes. Yeah, on the chalkboard, there was always a little corner, and there would be the number 86 and with a double line underneath it, and then they would put bullet points of, we're out of avocado, we're out of ice cream, we're out of the cheesecake. And so that was the lingo in the industry, as you'd always say, the cheesecake's 86, the guacamole's 86, which just means it's gone. You don't have any more left of it. So Chipotle was facing having avocado and guacamole as 86 on the menu if something big were to happen in that one growing region of Mexico. So the supply chain folks decided they wanted to look for these alternative sources of supply, but it doesn't sound like to me from the article, it doesn't sound like to me that they did a great job finding those other sources of supply. They do talk a lot about how there was one company, I believe it was in Colombia, that they went to, and they were giving the trials and travails of developing a new supplier. So the avocados would come in. They were a different type of avocado. They looked different. You couldn't tell when they were ripe. So they had to reach out to all the stores and say, hey, if it looks like this and you're thinking about sending it back, don't, because that's actually a ripe avocado. It's just a different type of avocado. So there's some training, there's some switching costs, there's some things that downstream you've got to start thinking about. But I think that for me, what this article represented, this is a day in the life of a category manager. This is how you need to be thinking. You need to be identifying risks or identifying opportunities, places that you can drive savings, can drive diversification, can develop new sources of supply. And I think if as a category manager, you're not always thinking that way, then you're not thinking.
Yeah, I'd imagine. So I did some back of the envelope math here. So was it in this article or another one? I read that Chipotle consumes or buys roughly like 5% of the U.S.'s avocado.
I think that's right. I think it was in this article.
Yeah, so you can back of the envelope to say they spend about $120 to $150 million on avocados, which is pretty insane. But I wonder if that's to the point. So usually these big initiatives, then the other thing that I was looking as you were talking here, Alan, it takes anywhere from 5 to 13 years for an avocado tree to be grown from seed to then produce fruit. And if you graft it, it could be, which is like, I don't know grafting. I feel like you might know grafting, Alan, for plants.
Done
trees. Yeah, I thought about doing it before and just never did it. But that it could be anywhere from 3 to 4 years for it to produce fruit. So, or produce, the avocado fruit.
Right.
So, I mean, these initiatives would take time, but you would feel like they would make a little bit more progress in 7 years. I mean, this is like a single point of failure. Like, what do they
Yeah.
charge? They charge like $1, probably like $2 to add avocado to your Chipotle bowl, and that avocado is probably like a fourth of an avocado. So for them, call it like 25 cents to charge $2. That's a big deal,
Yep.
right?
It is. It's
Um,
good margin
yeah.
food there.
So I'd imagine even if they give you half of it, it's still 50 cents to make $2. So I mean, this is like a critical piece of their end product too. So, and this is one of those examples, Alan, where it's not necessarily just about cost; it's about security, where
That's it.
you're
Risk.
working with the risk mitigation. You're working with these suppliers and these essentially probably countries, right? To
Hmm.
get the Haas avocado to see if it can grow there in that country on that farm. I'm sure there's a lot of restrictions. There always is on imported. Adding something to the local bio, right? Just to things could
That's right.
change, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, this is for me super interesting. Just the single point of failure thing, especially over $100 million worth of single point of failure, is it's pretty important.
It's hugely important. I think also one thing that this article didn't talk about, it was very much written from a supply chain perspective, which of course could be procurement, but oftentimes supply chain is mentioned in lieu of procurement, or they don't give enough emphasis to procurement. I don't know how big Chipotle's procurement team is. I wanted to do some digging, but wasn't able to before the podcast. Maybe I can bring some news on that next week. Maybe especially if I say some insightful things here and I get reached out to by some Chipotle procurement people.
Mm-hmm.
But my sense was the 25% tariff that's applied to avocados in Mexico. That's not, I mean, that's huge if you just absorb it. If you just take, if Chipotle just has to take a 25% price increase in avocados, that would be a big deal for Chipotle. But in terms of magnitude, when we talk about the Chinese tariffs, those I think are at 145%. So 25% is still relatively low. And a good procurement person, a good category manager here, in addition to being able to do sourcing many, many years ago to avoid some of this risk, a good procurement person, a good category manager should also be able to go back to these growers in Mexico and say, hey, we're not going to absorb all that 25% ourselves. Why don't we split this? Let's be good partners with each other. Let's split this down the middle, or figure out a way. Could they even get the Mexican farmers to somehow absorb it all themselves? So there's good procurement practices here that should be able to limit the damage for Chipotle for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and probably one of those things they just need to continue to do is just work with farmers around the world to test these out, especially if it's 3 to 5 years for grafted trees to produce. Like that's real time. You can't speed
Yeah.
up. You can't speed it up, unfortunately. Um, yeah, I mean, similar to what Starbucks did, right? They just work with all these farmers, like we talked last week on Starbucks. There's a lot of just opportunity working with different places, countries. In this case, like it's a lot of money that could be spent internally with countries that don't necessarily have, you know, exorbitant amounts of money. So they could help
Yeah.
those local
I've
communities.
not That's right. And I've not seen a lot of companies that have made the supplier management function as big as it possibly could be. It's I think that there's a lot of focus. I've seen a lot of focus in the procurement arena around sourcing and around contracts. But the supplier management focus, once you've chosen to source, say, 90% or 100% of your avocados from Mexico, there is a supplier development function where you need to spend good time with those farmers and really try and figure out how you can take cost out of the system, how you
Yeah.
can make sure that you're helping them develop into the best suppliers that they can be. And I don't see many procurement functions. I don't know if you have, Tom. I don't see many procurement functions that are really focusing a lot of time, money, energy into the supplier development piece.
Yeah, I mean, it ends up being all of this just like, it rolls back through your P&L and L and you're like, nah, it's not super worth it. But then the time where the hard time hits where your packaging has a bubble or a speck in it and it can't because it's, going to contaminate the food or, I mean, anything like that. The quality management, which a lot of it rolls down through suppliers. Like it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't there. You kind of checked all the boxes because you visited them once and you did an audit, but you didn't
Yep.
follow up or double check them or like you said help them out and help them improve or listen to them too. Sometimes the supplier manager is internal within your company, Like they'll be working with the suppliers and they'll learn stuff that maybe you need to change on your side. So
Big time.
there is a lot of just opportunity there that I agree. I mean, it's always tough to make the decisions can be tough when they're based upon risk, right? Like the 100-year flood type thing. Do I grade my house for the 100-year flood or for the 10-year, even though I like it flat? I don't know. Just
Yep.
like a random example, but like those are the type
Yep.
of decisions that happen because that different grading will cost more. So
Yep.
maybe you just don't build it, and you just say it should be fine. Yeah, this is the same thing that happens with quality management and supplier management.
I think that's right. All right, that's avocados. Should we go over to airplanes?
Avocados to fighter jets. So I similarly, as we both brought one article today, Alan. Do you know, little piece of trivia first, do you know the, call it average cost or range of cost for an F-35?
Yeah, I would guess, I'm just going to guess, a couple $1,000,000.
Okay, so 80 to like $110 million is the
Okay.
cost of one of these beautiful planes, as one person may
Yes.
call them, right?
That's huge.
But, yeah, I think what I found interesting about the F-35, so Wall Street Journal did an article. Alistair McDonald wrote it. So this just came out on Cinco de Mayo yesterday, and it's kind of, and I'll share in a sec the diagram because it's a diagram that I want to draw for everything, but never get around to. Nor do I have the skills. But it's really the F-35 to me. So they did a deep dive into where certain parts come from and the different suppliers that make up the F-35, and you think of the F-35 as an American thing, right? We export this thing. This thing is truly American. I don't know, put the flag on the side, all that kind of stuff. So there are suppliers from around the world that are going to be essentially tariffed because it gets put together here in the U.S. But this is something where you just realize, as I share my screen, you realize that it's coming from around the world. So
of course.
So check out this diagram. Don't you just want something drawn like this for everything?
That is sweet.
So what I'm showing here, it has the F-35 with all the foreign components in it, and it numbers them out. So I'm just going to scroll down here. So Martin Baker, Rolls-Royce, TT Electronics, these UK companies, BAE Systems, their defense contractor, they're all in the UK. So they'll make things like this seat, the ejector seat, the pilot stick, right? Some magnets, carbon harnesses. Denmark, they take care of, some of the piece of the tail, the gun pods. Then Australia does some. Germany does the fuselages. Italy, Leonardo does the wings. Then you have Canada doing some things, the chassis machinings. Norway takes a piece, the Netherlands. And then, like certain things as you go back through the supply chain, certain pieces will come from China because of whatever. Like stuff is just from around the world. But first off, what about this diagram, right? First off, it's just a nice drawing of an F-35.
It is. It's cool.
Right? It's like cool, penciled out, but just where things come from throughout that supply chain. What are your thoughts on that, Alan? First things first.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was badly off on the cost. I guess I should recalibrate costs of things, but no surprise
that's pre-tariffs too, Alan, I think.
Yeah. No surprise that I was a bit off on that one, but I had no idea. I would have assumed that because this is critical to the American warfighting machine, that we would have the majority of its components manufactured in the U.S. And it looks like that may or may not be true. Obviously, it all comes down to kind of final numbers, but that's a pretty diversified supply chain for what is an American warfighting vehicle.
Yeah, and it's built by Lockheed Martin, which is one of the main 3 to 4 defense contractors that we have in the United States.
That's why I got the cost off, Tom, because it's Lockheed. They're expensive.
Yeah. And there's other contractors, like defense contractors. I'm looking quick, but one was like 5% of the cost. So Northrop Grumman, they said they're only going to be affected. So they said 5% of their supply chain spend is abroad. But don't forget, right, the same thing that happens with the F-35 there, which is Lockheed, just happens throughout that supply chain. So sure, something might be manufactured in Germany or the UK, but one of those suppliers, they'll get certain of their components from somewhere else. So they're direct when you just run the PO report. Where did this go? Okay,
that's right.
Went to the UK. Yeah, but then where did those go from the UK to where else? Because they're a big defense contractor.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so what you're hinting at is, although that says those components are sourced in those countries, there could be Asian elements to their supply chain, non-friendly, non-allied countries that are a part of the supply chain for sure.
Yeah. The ones that I would bet aren't on there are any that are deemed as like formally as like Iran. Like you can't do business if you're doing business with the U.S. with Iran or Russia
Yep.
during the Ukraine, which I guess is still going on. Like you can't necessarily do business with Russia for these things for certain contracts. There'll be things written in that you can't, but like China, many other countries are still they're fine to do business with for many things.
Right.
Yeah, but I found it just very just a good example of just globalization, right? And things that you think are very quote unquote American or localized aren't. It says 1,900
Yes.
suppliers from a dozen countries make up
Yeah,
the supply
that's a
chain.
big supply. That's a big supply chain.
30,000 components. You tell me none of those components. Some are coming from maybe not non-friendly, but not super friendly nations, right?
Yeah, that's right. And all it takes is one of those parts to not be able to finish the fighter jet itself. So I know that this is big on a lot of other podcasts that you and I like to listen to, where the discussion around tariffs is, hey, this is long overdue because we find ourselves too globally dependent upon what might end up being non-friendly countries for our basic, kind of economic needs and military needs. And so we got to fix that. We got to fix that fast. And the tariffs are really, I think, forcing a lot of the American industry and a lot of the defense industry to focus on that and figure out where we can find alternative friendly sources or onshore sources, inside our own borders. Because if you're not able to source one of those components, that fighter jet might be complete. If it's the standard argument, it's a $5 part, but it renders an $80 million fighter jet unusable. So we don't want to find ourselves in that situation.
Just like your Chipotle burrito, if you need avocado, you don't want to eat it without, right? So,
That's right. You don't want it to be 86.
yeah. So and I mean it's just one of these things. Like how the way tariffs are being used is kind of like a who wants to be our friend type thing at this point, or how the reciprocity is a certain framing of it, but it really is the future of alliances and where we're going to land, right? The ones that end up having lower tariffs are probably going to buy more from them and become more closely intertwined with them. A lot of businesses, a lot of people end up going through to the lowest quality or the lowest cost quality supplier. So
Yep.
they'll do the math and they'll say, all right, well, it still makes more sense to buy this from the UK or from Spain or wherever that may be, or from China, even with the extra taxes, so extra tariffs. But yeah, so it's one of these things. I don't know if anybody's in the market for one of these F35s. You might need to buy it off eBay or something. But the new ones are going to cost a little bit more given that supply chain.
Yeah, it was always a saying in the venture capital industry when I worked there for the 6 years that I was there. It said, it takes the cost of an F-35 fighter to train a good venture capitalist. In other words, you had to invest 80 or 100 million bucks poorly, in bad companies before you finally kind of figured out how the whole industry worked. And
you have to have a good back end ROI on that one, Alan. You got to hit
boy, you're not kidding. So I didn't stick around long enough to be able to spend even that much money, but I had a couple successes under my belt. So maybe I only crashed half of the plane.
Yeah, you crashed the Leonardo wings and maybe some other things.
That's right.
A few fuselages and yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I just remember but it is pretty impressive because the cost isn't all just a F-35. I had a guy that had worked for me. He came from the airplane industry, and I remember him like just the ability to save money. I remember he was telling me a story about just like it was like the leather on the seats and like the 9-figure savings or whatever he got just from like just the way they change those things. The airplane industry will be an interesting we want to dive into at some point, like cost of a plane and opportunity and savings. Just side note beyond tariffs.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Maybe one of our how it's sourced episodes.
Sure. Yeah.
Good. All right, that feels like a wrap, Tom.
Yeah,
good topical short presentation today, and really interested to see more how these tariffs play out. I think everybody's a bit on pins and needles, but I think
is it 10? Is
I
it
heard
15? Is it? Yeah.
That's right. We don't know where we're going to land, but boy, everybody feels like the box has been shaken. It's interesting how the markets have largely settled back down again. They're right back to where they were. So not, nothing. No, doesn't appear that the markets are too very worried about where this is going.
We shall see.
We shall see. All right. Well, on behalf of your humble hosts here at the Rebuild Procurement Podcast, he is Thomas Finn, the guy who puts the fin in finance, and I'm your OG in procurement, Alan Veek, hoping that you will make this a powerful and productive week in procurement. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Show me, and you won't hear the word rebuild.